such a great presenter for this workshop is that I know when I've had a lot of years, I've done 7 years transfer advising, academic advising experience prior to this position. And when I reached out to students, when they were new students like you all are, I always ask students, are you interested in grad school? And high percentage of people say yes, but I noticed that not a lot of people get asked about it or think about it. I think when you think about your timeline, it can be really overwhelming and that it's pretty short. You know, if you come in with an associate's and you've done some major classes already, you're pretty close to graduating. You're pretty close to thinking about having to apply to grad school. So we want to make sure that, you know, as you all are new students, that you have that opportunity, that like you're not missing information. And then again, with Martha, she's done a lot of really interesting programs. And she's also working and being a grad student, which I think is a very common experience. And so I didn't want to be like, here's someone and they just like got a full scholarship, and like that is attainable for someone. You should do it if you can. But I know for a lot of transfer students, it looks unique, and Martha's had scholarships too. I don't want to speak for her, so I will let her go ahead. And really excited. And then I will try to keep an eye on the chat if you have any questions. And then we have audience here. So it's just meant to be quite interactive. So I'll give the time to Martha. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Let's see if I can. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone, and thank you for making the time to stop by today. So I'll start by introducing myself.
Just click here, and then it's that one. And then.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so the title for today's workshop is just going to graduate school as a transfer student. And I think before I get started, I just wanted to introduce myself and kind of share a little bit about myself with you all. And then I'll have like a little icebreaker in between to also get to know you a little bit as well. So like Paul mentioned, my name is Martha. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I went to Kearns High School and graduated back in 2013. So when I was a senior in high school, or before I was a senior, actually, I became acquainted with the U through a college prep program called Upward Bound. It's one of the TRIO programs. So through that program, I got to know the university campus. I got to take summer classes here and there. So I was kind of on track, or we were, yeah, you know, the point was to get students on track to join the University of Utah right after high school. However, for me, the opportunity presented itself and I was offered a scholarship through the Salt Lake Community College and the U. So this scholarship was called the Teacher Recruitment Scholarship, TRS for short. So this was for any student interested in teaching. So I was very passionate about education, teaching, and history. So I accepted it and I ended up going to Salt Lake Community College and then transferring to the U. So I transferred to the U back in 2015. And you know, that was a process of a lot of, I had a lot of questions, and even though I was familiar with the university, it was still kind of, thank you. It was still kind of confusing here and there. So before I continue, I wanted to know what schools or what states you all are coming from, and what was the transfer process like for you all. So for those of you on Zoom, feel free to type it in the chat and I can share that if you're comfortable with the rest of the people in person.
Anyone want to share? Where did you transfer from? Yes.
I transferred from Snow College.
Snow
So
College. Cool.
Ephraim.
Awesome, cool, thank you. Would you want to share a little bit about what it was like maybe the hardest part? And what made it easy for you, if at all?
For transferring,
Yes.
the hardest part was knowing if I could afford everything and making sure all the programs and everything and scholarships went through. So that was the hardest part for me. 'Cause it was like a bit of nervousness, but just how connected the university was for me to like be able to be like, hey, we're gonna be like classes stuff, and it was very quick and very straightforward. I knew what I was getting into.
Awesome, thank you. So to kind of share with the folks on Zoom, one of the hardships was paying for school, right? Because it kind of happened sudden and you have to be ready, right? Like, how are we going to cover if you're transferring in the fall semester or the spring? So attending graduate school was in some ways similar to transferring for me because it was brand new, right? So to go back, we have some people sharing on the before I keep going. So we have people who transfer from SLIC, so Virginia, Pasadena, and Southern California. Cool. And someone from American Military University. I know you're a history program. Cool. And someone else studying history. Awesome. And then ACE or USU. Cool. So before I started, before I started my graduate program, I had to plan for graduate school. So that's where it was similar to transferring, because one of the things the biggest thing in the back of my mind was, how will I pay for graduate school? Because I'm not sure if you all are familiar, but once you start graduate school, pretty much the only federal financial aid you get are unsubsidized funds. Right? So the rest you either have to find scholarships, or perhaps a teaching assistantship. So it's kind of tricky. So going back to my experience in my journey, I started taking into consideration if I wanted to attend graduate school, like when I was a junior and senior, in the senior year of my undergraduate degree. So I started thinking, okay, do I want to pursue a master's? Do I not? And I'm like, okay, I think I do. And then I started thinking about whether I wanted to stay in state or out of state. So the for me, whether or not a graduate or an advanced degree would be helpful. So for teaching, master's degrees do come in handy, right? Because they give you real experience. It's a teaching history, for example. And so it does come with a bit of it, right? For the education you have, such as the enrollment. So that was one factor. The other one, was flexibility. If I have the time, I have the guidance. Build the first time with attendance full time. So after I kind of decided that I wanted to stay in state for the institution, I started thinking about ways to connect my undergraduate degree, which was history teaching, with the perspective program. So I was looking at history degrees, not necessarily related to teaching, but just more related to so the length of the program,
So this program is a two-year program full-time, but since I was studying part-time, it was 4 years. So I started looking at how long I have to complete my program.
More comments on the chat.
Okay. Oh, is there something wrong with this? Yeah. Can you hear? Maybe if you talk a little louder. Okay. You just have to look at it. It fixes itself.
Okay, cool. So, so after deciding that I wanted to pursue a graduate degree, I started thinking about what programs, right? So the history department at the U has different degrees, different areas of concentration. So I started kind of browsing whenever I had a free evening and looking at, okay, they offer training in these areas. Are those areas that I'm interested in, right? Because at the end of the day, I would have to spend a lot of time reading, writing about something, right? So I had to make sure that it was something that I wanted to do. Aside from that, I think I also went on the website and looked at all of the requirements that they needed for the program. So typically, some programs, not all, require some sort of testing, whether it's the GRE or Praxis perhaps. So for me, I had to take the GRE. So I started prepping in advance. I knew kind of when I wanted to start, so then I worked backwards from there. I figured out the deadline for the GRE. I studied, I took it. I started doing all those things. However, something that I didn't do and I wish I would have done was to meet with someone from the department and kind of ask more follow-up questions, especially about, do you have faculty who are experts in the area that I want to research, right? In graduate school, I feel like that has been something vital, having someone who specializes in an area that you're interested in. So I think that's a good question to ask. Other questions that I wish I would have known was maybe like, do you guys offer any fee waivers? What kind of support do you offer for students? So prior to enrolling in this program, I didn't really think about advocating for myself in that way. Like, what can you offer me? What support do you have, right? Kind of like questioning them, not just allowing them to question you and your experiences and what you're bringing to the table, but also make sure that you interview them as well. Because at the end of the day, you're spending a lot of time and a lot of money. So I ended up enrolling in an MA in Latin American history. So I'm focusing on doing colonial history, which doesn't necessarily relate to my teacher training to teach history. But that is all to say that graduate school doesn't have to align perfectly with whatever you're majoring in right now. So any questions before I go ahead and continue? Or maybe any ideas as to what people might want to? If we have people who are interested in attending graduate school, do we have any particular interests, like any areas, any fields?
I like paleobiology.
Cool, paleobiology. And what are you majoring in?
Biology, but I want to double major in chemistry.
Cool, yeah,
I want to keep my options open for grad school.
awesome.
I mean, mine's super straightforward because there's a 5-year MSBS program for biomedical engineering. So that's just what I'm doing. I still have to like apply and stuff, but you know, my major is my graduate school. So.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, and we have a couple of people who share with us. Social work and nurse practitioner, cool. Those are really awesome, yeah. So, yeah, so if there is anyone who maybe has not thought about graduate school, but is now kind of considering it and wondering, oh, do I have to continue with what I started as an undergrad? Not necessarily, right? Like there are ways for you to prepare, but it doesn't have to align perfectly or continue in that same path. Business admin, okay, cool. So another concern or another thing that came up, during my journey was paying for graduate school. So the three main options that I think are the most known are, one, doing a GA-ship, a graduate assistantship, which is where, if I was working with the history department, I would be either teaching a course for them, they would pay for my tuition, and they would give me a stipend. So that's how they generally work. Another option would be scholarships, right? So there's many. They are departmental. They can be based on need, based on merit. I'm thinking as a graduate student, scholarships offered through centers like the Women's Resource Center, right? They offer them to everyone, not necessarily students who identify as female or women. And the other option is fellowships. So when I started my program, I applied for the FLAS fellowship and I got it. So the FLAS is the Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship, and it's a very generous one. So they cover tuition and they also give students a really nice stipend. However, my issue was that even with the fellowship, I still wouldn't have enough to pay for bills, housing, food, all of that, rent. So for me, my option was to work full-time, right? To supplement my income and to pay for whatever other expenses I had. So my option for me though, I didn't just wanna be working full-time, just somewhere random. So I opted to work at the U where I work now. So the Center for Equity and Student Belonging, because one, it aligned with sort of my philosophy when I was doing my undergraduate degree with promoting access to higher education for students who come from marginalized backgrounds, right? So when I saw the opening in CESB, I applied, I was hired. So then I started working at the U. And the U has a really cool benefit because after working full-time for 6 months, employees and I think their families, right? Like if you have a spouse, they would qualify for half tuition off. So after my first year of graduate school, I figured that I couldn't balance work full-time and also graduate school full-time. And I think this is on a case-by-case scenario. My program in particular is very intensive when it comes to reading and writing. So I had to start going part-time. So that meant that I couldn't keep my FLAS fellowship. So I had to give up my FLAS fellowship in order to kind of like allow myself to learn at a pace that was comfortable for me and to allow myself, the time that I needed to also take care of things that fall outside of my academic and work life. So, here I am, like starting my third year part-time in my MA program. So these are some of the things that, students are faced when it comes time to pay for tuition. So, there is funding out there. You just have to be creative as to how you use it and all of that. Any questions so far? Oh, okay, we have a question. So someone asked, is there no federal financial aid for graduate school? So I don't know if you all are familiar, but when you apply for FAFSA, you are granted a Pell Grant based on either your personal income or your parents if you're a dependent. So for graduate school, there's no Pell Grants. The aid that they offer is unsubsidized student loans. So that's pretty much it. So when it comes time to to find fellowships, scholarships, I would encourage to set a certain time aside just to Google and browse and do research, maybe make a list of scholarships that might be good for you or that can relate to what you're researching, and then applying for all of those. Yeah, like you can never apply to too many scholarships, I would say. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is staying in graduate school, right? Because one thing is to apply, to be admitted, to figure out how you're paying for it. But another thing is staying in the program, right? And then finishing it. So I think the point of this is to tell you that there will be adversity, right? And you never know how or when it'll show up, but life happens. So, so when I started my graduate program, like a lot of things happened. It was just kind of that timing where, you know, life happened. And then shortly after, we found ourselves in a pandemic, right? So I went from being in class for spring semester. Halfway through, we were told, oh, it looks like we're gonna shift things completely online and we're not gonna be going back to campus, right? At least for the meantime.
Just listen, practice, bro. You know, practice.
So that was kind of a curveball that I wasn't expecting. I don't think any of my classmates were expecting. And since we do research, we study history, a lot of us were relying on the library, right? Which also closed down. So specifically, my research had to do with the colonial period. So I was looking at really old not textbooks, but just books in the Marriott Library. So that kind of stopped and I had no alternative, right? It was just kind of like, oh, I got to figure it out. So that presented me with either like making up some random paper, because at the end of the semester, I was expected to complete a research paper, or kind of requesting a meeting with my professor and kind of having that, you know, conversation that can feel sometimes awkward. I know for me, feelings of inadequacy came up. So I was like, I'm not a good student because I'm not going to be able to complete this paper. But at the end of the day, like professors are very understanding. And it doesn't have to be a pandemic, right? For people to be struggling or be dealing with a lot of things in their lives. So I would highly encourage you all to just make the time to get to know your professors, visit, kind of get to know maybe a little bit about what they research, right? And then start a conversation based on that. But one of the things I found out was that I know that before I continue, how many of you are familiar with incomplete letter grades? Some here and there. So incomplete letter grades, when something happens, right, and you're not able to finish a course, instead of taking an E, a failing grade, you can talk to the professor and request an incomplete. So the incomplete gives you about a year from when you request it to complete all the missing work, and then get a passing grade, right, based on on the quality of the work that you turned in, etc. So for graduate school, they have those incompletes, but they also have AT letter grade, which is, it kind of signals that the student is working on that class. It's a work in progress. So instead of taking the E grade, right, because it was kind of out of my control what happened, I just said, hey, it looks like I won't be able to finish a quality paper, and instead of turning something that I'm not proud of, I'd rather take the T. So those are options, as well as taking a leave of absence. I think it was a year from the pandemic where I kind of had to sit and just be like, you know what, it looks like I need a leave of absence. So that's another option. I'm sure that each department varies and they have their different kind of like regulations. But for me, I only took one class. So it wasn't a true leave of absence because I was still enrolled as a student. But I was able to stop my research coursework and kind of just focus on the funner, which is a language course. So I'm learning a new language that kind of complements my research. So I'm learning an indigenous language, Nahuatl, which was spoken in Mexico in the colonial period and is still spoken today. But it just kind of correlates directly with my research. So I continued learning the language, but I told them, you know, hey, it looks like I'm feeling a little bit like I'm burning out. I need a break. So just knowing that the leave of absence is an option is also something that I hope you all remember. Just, you know, if you ever find yourself in, hello.
Sorry, I'm still a little late.
Oh, you're great. Yeah, so knowing that there are, you know, those options to get a T or an incomplete, a leave of absence, or ADA accommodations if you ever need them. I think overall is, it's just really important to know that you can advocate for yourself. Because a lot of times I felt like I was a student, so I really had no right to go to a professor and say, hey, like this is going on, I kind of need an extension. But I think it's very important because some graduate programs are kind of more intensive, fast paced, more demanding. So there's always options. And another thing that I recommend is to find community, right? And community will look different to all of us. I know for me, I went from having maybe like 10 peers being doing their undergraduate programs at the same time that I was, to being the only person in my group of friends, right? Being in graduate school. So yeah, I would recommend finding community, however it looks, whatever it looks like to you, and also surrounding yourself with folks who inspire you, right? For me, when I took my leave of absence, it was taking that one language class because I knew that one of my friends who is working on her PhD was also learning the language, and she was also doing research different from me, but you know, it was exciting to get to talk to someone who was also excited about similar things that I was. Yeah. Any questions?
Don't be shy.
Okay, we have something. Do any jobs with the U qualify for tuition?
Yes, so the question is, do any jobs at the U qualify for half tuition, even jobs at the U hospital? And the answer is yes. And so one of the really kind of cool things about the U also with that the U has the hospital is any job that you would get benefits like health insurance. So any job that's more than 20 hours a week that you get benefits for will also qualify for half off tuition. And so actually half off tuition was something that when I advised transfer students, they also did. I know that some people mentioned nursing as an interest. I have had a couple students in their undergrad, as well as in grad school, work in the U hospital. They weren't fully a nurse. They were like a CNA, but as long as they were working like full time, they did qualify for half off tuition. And so that made a lot of sense. I knew some students who did like night shifts so that they could work in the night and then go to class in the day and then get half off tuition. That was also very difficult. But yeah, so any U of U job that is benefited, so you definitely have to talk to like HR of like your benefits, but that is part of your benefits. So like health insurance and dental insurance and retirement and half off tuition, those are all kind of, there's probably more than that, but those are all kind of the big benefits. And so yeah, the half off tuition, and then your spouse also, Martha mentioned that. So my partner took, and then actually they're very generous. So my partner did a yoga licensure here at the U. And because that was through the U's yoga program, even though that wasn't necessarily like a class, She got half off tuition for that. I did a continuing education class that was like a couple $100, just for fun, just to do some exercise while I was taking more serious, difficult grad school classes, and I got half off for that too. So it's really pretty cool. So I would say definitely recommend that. I know that's an option that sometimes people aren't aware of, but particularly if you know that there's like, it relates to your majors, if you're in a health major, or I know that a lot of programs have labs, so either like do an assistantship. Yes, so there's lots of options. So that's a great question in terms of connecting to getting half off tuition through working at the U.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to do it, but it is really nice when you see your tuition bill, it's like maybe a couple of classes and it's 3,000. And then with the tuition benefit, it ends up being 1,500, right? Like it does help. And it does make a big difference. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you want to talk about working full time? And because I know like you had to like with your schedule, your grad schedule and your work schedule, I think that's a common thing of like
Yeah.
flexibility.
Yeah. So something else that I learned while doing my program or trying to balance my program full time with working full time is that I had to give up a lot of like my rest time, because after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I had like maybe a 1-year gap where I kind of got used to resting and kind of doing things that I liked. So, shifting back to attending school full-time, working full-time, which I had never done, it kind of took me by surprise by, how time consuming even just 2 classes can be in graduate school. So what I've been doing now, I'm following a schedule. So I'm working full-time, but I'm also doing classes part-time, right? Because at the end of the day, I know that I have the length, like the wiggle room to finish those classes. But I know that taking care of myself, either exercising, cooking for myself, making sure that my apartment is clean, right? Those are things that I need, that are immediate needs, and I cannot neglect. So instead of trying to rush, and trying to finish my program, I decided that it would be best for me and my health, right, to just kind of go part-time and take longer than expected. Yeah, so cool. Thank you for mentioning that, Paul. So another thing that has been really helpful is that once or twice a week, I'm able to leave work for like 1 hour to attend a class. So it's my language class, which is not very intense. But there is that flexibility that some employers, who understand might let you out of work a little bit early, or might let you flex those hours, right? So for me, that has been helpful, especially when the only classes available were during work hours. So I was able to work something out with my supervisor where I could attend class, slowly work in the middle of the day and then come back or make those hours up.
And then, yes.
Cool. So yeah, we have a good question. So someone asked about the FLAS fellowship. So the FLAS stands for foreign area and foreign language and area studies. So so I'm studying now, like I mentioned, it correlates with my history research interests. So now is not a very commonly spoken language. So there's FLAS fellowships for Nahuatl, for Quechua, which is an indigenous language spoken in Peru. There's also Nahuatl or FLAS for.
There's a lot of Asian languages, so Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Hindi, Urdu. Those are the I advise a lot of Asian students. I know the Asian languages, but there also is, you can make your case because I know that some of the Pacific Islander languages are new. And so if you were to study that, I think you can say like, I'm interested in studying this language. I think you can also petition languages that aren't on the list, but the idea is that have to be understudied. And that the government is encouraging study of those languages.
Yeah, so the way that it works, you apply for it. It's a little bit different for undergraduate students. They have to take, is it 1 or 2 semesters? I believe it's 2 semesters. So if you start with 1010 and 1020, when you're ready to enroll for 2010, that's when you would be eligible to apply for a FLAS fellowship. So all it means is that one, you're studying the language, but you're also taking classes related to that area where the language is spoken. So for me, it lined up very nicely. So that was one of the reasons why I did FLAS. But that was a great question.
And then I could add on,
Yeah.
I know a couple of students who received the FLAS fellowship, and so you can really pair it with any major. So don't so it's like obviously very clear with Martha, her research, like reading things in the language is important, but I had a student who was international business, and so if you're interested in business, and for him, he wanted to do business in Cambodia, and so the Khmer language is one of the, which is the Cambodian language, is one of the languages that is a FLAS eligible scholarship. And so he made an argument that like, if in order to do his business practices that he wanted to do in school well, knowing a better understanding Cambodian would help. And he received that. I've known that Quechua, which is a Peruvian indigenous language, a person was a social worker, and so in terms of working with particular indigenous communities here that speak Quechua, that was one. I've also known people who with healthcare, Portuguese. Now I'm thinking, remember other languages. Portuguese is one of the class eligible languages, and so she made an argument that she could better speak to different healthcare populations that she wanted to work with by getting the FLAS. And so there are a lot of ways that like you can combine it with the major. So I hope that people when they think FLAS, they think like, oh, I could combine that of like how a language knowledge could help your career. So I just want to make sure I said that so people don't think like that doesn't apply to me, because I've seen a lot of different majors apply for the FLAS, and a lot of people get it in a lot of different fields. So yeah, so I've seen it in business, I've seen it in social work, I've seen it in health related fields, history. So I also knew someone like kind of community action as another Cambodian, Vietnamese as well. So yeah, they were also in business. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool opportunities with that, but that's not the only grad school scholarship. I would say look at your department. I was in the College of Education for grad school, and they had a lot of graduate school scholarships. I had an assistantship where I helped teach a class and pay my tuition, and then after that assistantship was over, I got a scholarship to pay for my tuition. So there are lots of ways to do it. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of these. So this is why I wanted this workshop now is I want you all aware of this now so that we can help, feel free to reach out to us. We're orientation transition, Martha's and Center for Equity and Student Belonging. But in the different classes in international area studies. So hopefully you can start thinking about like how can this be, like how can you actually do it? And that's what the goal is for today.
Yeah, there's many ways. Like I said, it takes a little bit of creativity to find a way to relate, right? Maybe a language with what you're doing. But I think at the end of the day, it just allows you to have a cooler experience, right? Learn something new. And maybe like a different way of thinking, viewing the world. So yeah, I think it's really cool. If you can, I would encourage you to apply for a FLAS. Any other questions?
Cool. So the last part of this, we definitely want it to be interactive. So you don't have to ask in this formal. You can talk to us afterwards. I also went and did grad school. So Martha is the star though. So, but you can also ask me questions. You're free to welcome to ask questions in the chat. Before we close it, I'll put the link to show that you signed up in the chat again. But really want to have this time for you to so this is a link you just need to click on it for the people in the Zoom audience, and we'll do it. And then if that doesn't work, I know I'm gonna put my email. But really, ask us questions, ask Martha questions. I think a lot of things, kind of going to Martha's point too, of like I didn't think it would happen to me. I did a master's and a doctorate in education. And I'll keep this vague because I did it here, but I was like, oh, I'll do my doctorate here. I know the professors, I won't have any issues. And then two of my professors who were on my committee at the same time got in a very public fight at the university. It was long enough ago now that I graduated. I don't think anyone will know who that is. But I really didn't know what to do. Like I had a committee member basically leave my committee over a disagreement with another committee member. And that kind of threw me off. And so that was an adversity that I faced. I also had kids while as a grad student, and my wife was a very difficult pregnancy where she almost died. And I also had to take a leave of absence for that. Yeah, a lot of life happens. So even as best as you plan for things, definitely want to let you all know that like there will be adversity, but you can overcome it. And we want to help make sure that you have these resources and ideas. And I would hate for anyone to feel like, oh, this came up and now I'm gonna stop. Like we don't want that to happen with anyone here or anyone in general. But things can happen where I was probably too self-assured that nothing would happen to me, and then all this stuff happened to me while I was in grad school. So feel free to come up, ask us questions now, ask us questions in the chat or in person after, and grab some food if you're here in person. We have some snacks, and there should be what I think they do the best at, and some tea, which will be fun. And yeah, any other questions? Let us know. And then, oh yes.
I just wanted to ask, so I know you mentioned how like you can get a big discount and if you want to be university. So I do know that many graduate students tend to do TAs for classes.
Yes.
Is that something that is kind of like the?
Yes. That's a great question.
Yeah, and sorry, the last part of your question was, is that something that is?
That like. That can be
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have, taken a TA-ship if I had been maybe like sharing an apartment with somebody, if I wasn't just paying for my own rent, if I had reduced like expenses. But like if you have roommates or if you're living like with family members, I think TA-ship would be great.
Yeah, and I had a TA-ship, so I can talk a little bit more how it works. And it depends on the department, but again, this is great questions to ask now when you're looking at grad programs, because one of the things that happened for me was I had thought about Columbia University, which is in Teachers College in particular for education. It's one of the very top schools of education in the world, basically. And so because they were so, I grew up in Florida too, I should mention that. So I came from out of state. So I was going out of state, and I had talked to professors actually at Columbia, and they said they didn't guarantee they would get in, but they weren't that worried if I would get in or not. But then they were like, we don't offer funding because we're Teachers College and everyone wants to go to Teachers College. And it's in New York City, and you have to find your own apartment. We don't have housing. You have to find it on your own. And then another faculty member who had gone to Teachers College was like, have you heard of the University of Utah? And that literally changed my life, because I was like, no, I'm from Florida, not University of Utah. And so I met a professor there, and they're like, yes, we have funding opportunities, and if you come here, there's a lot of ways you could get your tuition paid. And so I actually got almost all of the different ones over both my master's and PhD. Was I was a teaching assistant, and so the way that worked, and then again, you would need to talk to your department. But those are things that you can apply into as you're applying to graduate school. So you definitely want to be aware of like what are the early priority deadlines for grad school, what are the opportunities they offer. And so I had a teaching assistantship. I helped a professor teach a multicultural education class, and that covered my tuition, so I didn't pay any tuition. And you get a little bit of a stipend, but it's not a lot. So it's like, I think now it's like 13 or 14,000. I think it was like 11 or 12 when I did it. And so it's like you can barely afford rent. And so for me, I was like, I can scrape it together, but like other people like Martha, like it just doesn't work. So you have to figure out what's the situation that works best for you. And then I had a thing called a research assistantship where I helped a professor who wrote a book. And then also he wrote a couple of articles, and I helped him with collecting the data and doing the research on it. And that paid my tuition. Again, it was a stipend, but not a huge stipend. And then I got a scholarship through my department after that, where I didn't have to work, but it just paid my tuition. So those are all options. But I would say now, even though you're all new transfer students, this is a good time to look at those. And it's a good time, like, they're going to interview you, but you can interview them back of like, what are my options? What opportunities do you offer? And that could be a really big decision. I mean, that's the reason I went to Utah and not New York City. So, because I'm sure I would have like $100,000 for that, and I didn't want to do that. And I don't have barely anything. So, that was a good thing. So, I would say, yeah, does that answer your question? How it teaching assistantships work, but research assistantships or just general GA, general graduate assistant, all have that same kind of like, you don't pay tuition. It can even cover out-of-state tuition in most cases, but it doesn't, you don't get paid a ton. You get a little bit of a stipend, but you don't get paid it. Yes.
What kind of things do you issue with undergraduate years to prepare you for graduate school?
So a good question. So just so that people can hear. So someone asked, what are some things that I wish I would have done as an undergrad student to prepare for graduate school? I think, let's see. I don't have anything, pressing that I'm like, shoot, I wish I would have done that. But maybe as a graduate student, I wish I would have or actually, no, yeah, to answer your question, yes. I wish I would have gotten used to approaching professors as an undergraduate student with questions, with, if I needed advice or help with a paper or whatever. I kind of got very used to just doing things by myself and alone. So when I started my program, I kind of had that mentality of I can do this, So approaching professors and also getting to know your classmates in programs. I went from like large courses to now being in a classroom with maybe 8 or 9 students. Getting to know them, and also, like finding a study buddy. This is something that became a big issue for me because after I graduated, I came back as a student, but a lot of my friends were either practicing professionals or were waiting longer to start their graduate programs. So I was the only one in school, and I didn't know anyone in my program. So I needed to find people to study with. And be consistent, So I have been doing that ever since, just getting to know other people, their research. This is what I'm doing. And it's a way to hold each other accountable when it comes to doing your work. Good question. What do you think?
I think for me, asking for help. This happened a little more in grad school, but I would say even before. I went to Utah without really ever being here before. And I could have really asked a lot of questions about the department. I was lucky in some ways that like I came here on kind of a leap of faith and then I got an assistantship, but I could have like done more research and like been more assured that I was getting it and versus like it happening. And so really reaching out and asking questions. I remember I had a classmate who was really interested in the program that I was in. And he went and he basically interviewed the professors and like, why should I go here? And I was like, you can do that. And they gave him like they really talked to him and they really said, well, this is the resources we have and this is what we can offer. And I was like, I didn't know that. Like I didn't ask. So like asking those questions because I think one thing that I when I work with students in my past role is I used to do transfer academic advising was when you apply to grad school, a lot of times they would have students who'd be like, I don't know if I can afford like 10 grad school applications. But what you can do is you can ask like, hey, like this is expensive. Can you waive it? And so many cases, not all the time, but so many cases, they were able to waive it, or they were able to say like, hey, we can pay for you to come visit the campus while you're still in undergrad. And I know lots of students who've done like interviews in person or like campus visits while they're still like undergrads before like they know they're graduating like before they graduated. And those are things that like I didn't do that I wish I did. Like that you can go talk to the faculty, that you can go visit the campus, particularly if it's out of state or even in state, you can talk to the faculty members. And so like I felt like I would have graduated a lot faster if I had done some of those things where you just have to ask and like the worst they can say is no, but if you don't ask, it's basically no anyway. So it was just really surprising, I think, for me when I finished, and this would apply for you as you're starting, is I was struggling and I was taking a little time to graduate, and I was like, this is what I need to graduate. If I could have like this lab space and this support with this software I was using that was really unique to I use geographic information systems in my dissertation. If I could have this support I could finish. And they said, oh, we can do all of those things. And I was like, I waited so long to ask that. Like I could have asked that at the beginning and I would have graduated so much faster. So things like that, there is a lot of leeway in grad school that they don't necessarily say. So like I needed a software that was fairly expensive that I had access to when I took classes in GIS, but I didn't after I took classes as I was finishing my dissertation. And so asking about that and they were like, oh yeah, we can do it. We can put it on the office computer and we can give you, I needed access into the building because I worked. And I was like, oh, I need to get in after 5, but you know me. So they let me in after 5 for 1 semester so that I could finish. But like all those things you can ask for and no one ever, like I never knew that you could do that. And so I would say ask for stuff with something. And yeah, like there's so many opportunities for like, oh, you could visit a campus or you could get your application waived to a grad program that I would definitely take advantage of. Like that would just help make a decision so much easier. Any other questions? We're
Great questions.
almost
yeah.
done. But
Any other questions?
yes.
Yeah.
With fellowships, is there any direct resources, whether online or at the school itself, where you can look through and see what the fund?
I would say there's a graduate school office and there's also a graduate school diversity office. So I would reach out to the graduate school. You'll have to talk to them as you do. If you do a master's thesis or dissertation, they're the ones that proofread it. So I very remember that. But you can reach out to them. And I know that like when I've had former students reach out, they listed like, and then there's some funding in the grad school itself. So I would reach out to, let's say if you're going to the University of Utah for grad school, the University of Utah grad schools program, or if it's another state, reaching out to them. I think that was something that I did as an undergrad that was really beneficial was I was interested, I didn't exactly do this, but I was interested in anthropology and education. And so I like emailed a professor at Columbia and they responded back and they told me like what I said about like that about getting in and what funding would look like and what housing would look like. And so even it was like kind of a cold email of like, I want to go to this grad school. And they responded. And also if they don't respond, that's also a sign. So, I would say like, I felt so much better where it was like, oh, these are the schools that actually responded to my emails. So I would say, reaching out And, there's a lot, it's a little tricky. There's a lot of places to look. So I would start with a graduate school, but looking at your department, so College of Education, I think it was technically a fellowship because it paid all my tuition. So I had the Jones scholarship or fellowship in the College of Education. So you're looking in your major in grad school, looking at, your graduate school office in the university, and then just talking to your professors. So like one of my best opportunities was to be a research assistant. And that was my professor who I worked with got money. A lot of professors do research and get grants. And so they have a grant like that, not necessarily posted online. And so reaching out to them will be the ones that that's how you get it. So I had so many students I work with who, because they were good at talking to their professors and reaching out, when a professor got a grant, those were the students who were the first ones on their mind. And so even if they don't have a grant now, that potentially could give you money for grad school. So I would say like, go to all your department events if they have free food too. And so they know you. That really helped me, where I came to everything in my department and then they had funding and they were like, Paul comes to everything. Maybe we should think about him. So I think there's lots of strategies and we're happy to talk more, but starting spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know in my department, there's a graduate email list where, yeah, whenever those opportunities arise, they send it out to us, and then it's up to us to respond and say, yeah, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. Yeah, with jobs and anything like that.
So I think we're at 4. So anyone feel free to answer. And then I did put, sign up. It's in the chat, the link. And then if you have any questions in person, and then for the people in person, please come grab some food on your way out and ask us questions. And then I have a tablet to sign in. So if you haven't signed in person, please come and sign that too. Thank you. I'm gonna end it.